Instead of terminology pondering for this one, I'm going to do terminology differentiating. And that's terminology differentiating per my experience. This is based on real in life lived experience. And I'm going to differentiate talk over v talk down. So talk over versus talk down. And so talk over is one I'd say is depending on one in a like an office setting, the work environment, talk over is one that can come up a fair amount in like group settings. So if it's a group setting and it's kind of we're talking about a topic or something like that, it can be like it's one where it's kind of like somebody's speaking and then another person comes along and starts speaking and like over the person who's already speaking because like they're really eager or they really don't agree or they really think their point is matter or they're just like, oh, I just thought of something, you know. And so it can be a mixture of reasons why. However, like it's one that I'd say in certain like competitive office working environments in a group setting where people like actually get frustrated enough that it becomes part of our communication space to be like, please don't talk over me. Please don't talk over so-and-so. I like what they're saying. You know, I like that for real becomes part of the communication skill set for my work history. And so can you please not interrupt me while I'm speaking? So then there's it can depend, you know, within talking over there's like different forms of like addressing talking over. So there we go. There's the like talking over, like, and it's like most archetype senses, like one person speaking and the other person starts speaking and doesn't interrupt. They actually are talking at the same time. It's just like one person started before the other. Okay. So it's a in a competitive work office environment. So I'm a person who's learned silence is part of my skill set, and that does come in because I'm like, I become an active listener without words, and that's a skill that I've worked on for over a decade. Okay. Okay. So that's talk down. So how is that different, or talk over? Pardon me. How is that different than talk down? Well, talk down is there's kind of like I'd say two senses of that. So I worked as a lifeguard and I worked in student housing rule enforcement. I was a resident assistant and we had to enforce the rules with the people who lived in the living community. And in that context, very formal, like we even had the, you know, Honolulu Police Department would send officers to be out there with us, okay, to enforce rules. Although they'd kind of like let us do our thing and watch, you know, look at them struggle with the residents. So, but like in a playful way. And so, in that sense, talking somebody down or something down, talk down, was necessary because, like, you know, I'd be on shift and there'd be somebody who would throw a glass bottle. Somebody would pull out a knife. Or I wouldn't be on shift, but I'd be in the building and this kind of thing would happen. There'd be a fight in the courtyard. There'd be somebody who has a medical emergency and somebody's freaking out. And so we'd need to talk down. We'd need to talk the person down so that they didn't hurt anybody. So there's that sense, which is kind of like taking the person's anger or feeling or fear and talking them down out of that state. So that's one form of talk down. That's the one that I'm familiar with and I was required to do per work contract. There's another form of talk down, which is like, which I've brought up previously, where it's kind of the person puts another person down. So somebody says something and a person in response kind of goes, no, we're going to do what I'm going to say. And you're like, okay, well, that's just disagreement. No, it'll be like a person speaks. So it's my turf. It's my birthday. And somebody else says, no, we're going to do this, or disregards that and like does something else. Right, so that's talking down, and they like say it to the person's face. So it's like a disrespecting kind of the correct like authority space or ownership space. So you can think of it as talk down in that sense as a form of insubordination or in misconduct. So, which is a bit different than like, you know, of course I talked down. That was my job. If I didn't do that, that person would have stabbed another person and the person could have died, right? So there's like the talk downs, the kind of like I'm aware of are like very different. And very different in terms of talk than like talking over. So for me, like in my work experience, I'd say I don't run a risk of like, in lived experience, talk over and talk down are not necessarily confusable in terms of like me actually having to execute on a work contract a certain way. However, if taking the like talking down versus talking over, I'd say like where the talking down is like a reaction to what another person said, that one where it's like putting the person down and disregarding and disrespecting, kind of being insubordinate and disrespecting the authority or ownership of the person. The difference there is that the person talking down, and I've experienced it enough to be like, they tend to wait for the person to stop speaking. So it tends not to be talking over. Those tend to be different things. So there's that. I'd say and to put it rather bluntly, talking down tends not to be confusable as a bad thing, whereas talking over, the intent of the person who's talking over can be a full spectrum of things. Talking down tends to just be, no, it's as negative as it sounds, and that person's doing it intentionally to make it clear that they don't think your idea is a good idea. Okay. So if you feel like you're offended and the person has made it clear that they are trying to offend you, I would say I might start with talk down as opposed to talk over. So there we go. That's a terminology differentiating per experience. Talk over v talk down.